A little girl stands alone in the rain on a dead highway in the middle of nowhere. No shoes, no coat, just a stuffed rabbit pressed against her chest like it's the last thing keeping her alive. Behind her, an abandoned gas station with shattered windows and a rusted sign nobody's read in 20 years. She's 8 years old, and she's being hunted. 5 bikers pull off the road. 5 men the world forgot. 5 veterans carrying wounds no hospital ever treated. When the girl looks at the necklace around the leader's neck, she starts crying. What she says next will change everything. Stay with me until the end. This one's going to wreck you. Hit that like button, drop your city in the comments, and let's ride. The rain came sideways. Not the kind that cleaned things, the kind that punished. It hit the cracked asphalt of Route 191 like shrapnel, turning the 2-lane highway into a river of mud and dead light. Lightning split the sky somewhere over the Dragoon Mountains, and the thunder followed 3 seconds later, close enough to make the ground hum beneath 5 sets of tires. Ronan Creed felt it in his teeth. He rode point, same as always. 53 years old with a face that looked carved from desert sandstone and then left out in the weather for another decade. His beard was more gray than brown now. His knuckles were scarred from things he never talked about, and his left knee had been rebuilt twice. Once by a Navy surgeon in a field hospital that smelled like diesel and blood. Once by a VA doctor who told him he'd never ride again. That was 11 years ago. The knee still ached every time the barometric pressure dropped, which meant tonight it screamed. Behind him rode 4 men who understood that particular kind of screaming without needing to hear it. Declan Wraith Maguire held second position, a lean ghost of a man with hollow cheeks and eyes that hadn't fully slept since 2004. He'd done 3 tours and come home to a wife who'd already moved on and a son who called another man Dad. He never fought it, never raised his voice, just packed a single duffel bag and rode south until the road ran out of names. Third was Hector Torch Delgado, the Brotherhood's mechanic and the only man Ronan had ever seen disassemble a Harley engine, blindfolded on a bet, and win. Torch had burn scars across both forearms. Not from combat, but from pulling 2 kids out of a house fire in Tucson 7 years back. The kids survived. Torch never mentioned it. The scars spoke loud enough. Fourth rode Sully Ames, a former combat medic who still carried a field kit on every ride because he said old habits were cheaper than therapy. Sully laughed more than the others, told worse jokes, drank less. But sometimes at night when the campfire burned low, his hands would start shaking and he'd grip his own wrists until the knuckles went white, staring at something none of them could see. Last came the youngest, Gabriel Grit Vasquez, 38, but looking older. Grit had been dishonorably discharged for punching a commanding officer who'd ordered his squad into an ambush that killed 4 men. The discharge was later overturned, quietly, without apology. By then, Grit had already lost his apartment, his credit, and most of his faith in anything that wore a uniform. Ronan found him sleeping behind a laundromat in Flagstaff and handed him a helmet without a word. 5 men. 1 road. No destination that mattered more than the ride itself. The Iron Covenant Motorcycle Brotherhood wasn't a club in any way the world would recognize. No clubhouse with neon signs, no territory wars, no criminal enterprise. Just 5 broken men who'd made a pact that when one of them needed something, the others showed up. No questions, no conditions, no expiration date. Tonight they were riding toward nothing in particular, just south, away from a charity run in Prescott that had gone sideways when a local sheriff's deputy decided 5 bikers at a gas station constituted probable cause. Ronan had kept his hands visible the entire time, answered every question, showed ID, stayed calm while the deputy's hand rested on his holster like he was hoping for a reason. They always hoped for a reason. Ronan had swallowed it the way he swallowed everything, silently, with his jaw locked so tight his molars ached for an hour afterward. The others said nothing. They'd all learned the same lesson. The world had a slot for men like them, and that slot was somewhere between suspicious and disposable. The rain intensified. Torch's voice crackled through the helmet comm. Ronan, pull off. Visibility's gone. He was right. The headlights were punching maybe 40 feet into the dark before the rain swallowed everything. Ronan scanned the roadside through water-blurred eyes and caught the outline of a structure. Low, flat-roofed, dark. An old gas station, maybe, the kind that died when the interstate bypassed the town it once served. He signaled. 5 bikes banked right, tires hissing through standing water, and rolled to a stop beneath what remained of a corrugated metal canopy. The roof leaked in 6 places, but it was better than open highway. Engines died one by one. The silence that followed was enormous. Ronan pulled his helmet off and let the rain drip from his beard. His leather cut was soaked through. The patches, faded, hand-stitched, clung to his shoulders like something that refused to let go. He lit a cigarette under cupped hands, the flame trembling in the wind, and took a drag that burned all the way down. "Station's been dead 10 years minimum," Wraith said, swinging off his bike. He pulled a small flashlight from his vest and swept the building. Broken windows, a door hanging from one hinge. Graffiti that had been rained on so many times it looked like abstract art. "Nobody's home." "Good," Sully muttered. "I'm not in the mood for company." Grit was already stretching his back, wincing. "How far to the next town?" 40 miles, Torch said. "Maybe 50. Nothing between here and there but coyotes and regret." Ronan said nothing. He stood at the edge of the canopy, smoking, watching the rain turn the desert into something that looked like the ocean at night. Vast, formless, indifferent. His left hand hung at his side. His right held the cigarette. Around his neck, barely visible beneath the collar of his flannel shirt, hung a silver necklace. A military challenge coin mounted inside a hand-forged steel frame. The edges worn smooth from decades of contact with skin. He touched it without thinking, the way a man touches a scar. That's when Wraith's flashlight caught something moving near the far end of the building. Small, low to the ground, fast. Wraith's hand went to his belt instinctively. Ronan's arm shot out, blocking him. "Wait." The movement stopped. Then it started again, not running away, but shifting, like something cornered, like something trying to decide between hiding and collapsing. Ronan stepped off the concrete pad and into the rain. Water hit his shoulders like a punishment. He walked slowly, boots sinking into the mud, cigarette abandoned on the ground behind him. He didn't reach for anything, didn't raise his voice. 20 feet from the building's edge, he saw her. A girl. 8 years old, maybe 9. Soaked to the bone in a thin cotton dress that had been white once and was now the color of wet cement. No jacket, no shoes. Her feet were scratched and muddy, her arms wrapped around a stuffed rabbit so waterlogged it looked like it weighed 10 pounds. Her dark hair was plastered to her skull, and her eyes, enormous, dark, terrified, stared at Ronan with the kind of fear that doesn't come from being startled. It comes from being hunted. Ronan stopped. He lowered himself slowly to one knee, ignoring the explosion of pain in the joint, and put both hands where she could see them. Open palms, no weapons, no sudden movements. "Hey," he said. His voice came out rougher than he intended. 20 years of cigarettes and silence had done that. He tried again, softer. "Hey, you okay?" She didn't answer. Her body was shaking, not just from cold, but from the kind of sustained adrenaline that meant she'd been running for a long time. Hours, maybe. Her lips were blue. Behind him, the other 4 had fanned out under the canopy, watching. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. 5 men who'd seen combat in places the evening news never mentioned, and a little girl in the rain had stopped all of them cold. "I'm not going to hurt you," Ronan said. "None of us are. You understand?" Her eyes darted from Ronan to the bikes, then to the men behind him, then back. She pressed the rabbit tighter against her chest. "You out here alone?" Nothing. Just the rain. Just her breathing. Shallow, fast. The rhythm of a small animal deciding whether to bolt. Sully stepped forward slowly, unzipping his jacket. "She's hypothermic. If we don't get her warm in the next 20 minutes... "I know," Ronan said without turning around. He reached up and unclipped his own jacket. Heavy leather, lined with flannel, still carrying his body heat. He held it out toward the girl, arm extended, not moving closer. "It's warm," he said. "That's all it is." For a long moment, nothing happened. Rain hammered the metal roof. Lightning turned the sky white. In that flash, Ronan saw something in the girl's face that made his stomach drop. Not just fear, but recognition. She was studying him. Not the way a scared child looks at a stranger, but the way someone looks at something they've been searching for. Her eyes moved from his face to his neck. to the necklace. The silver chain had slipped free of his collar in the rain. The challenge coin hung against his chest, catching what little light existed. The wolf's head engraved on one side, the 13 stars on the other. Markings that meant nothing to anyone who hadn't been there. The girl's expression shattered. Her lower lip trembled first, then her chin, then her entire face collapsed into something that wasn't just crying. It was grief. Raw, old, unprocessed grief that had been locked inside a body too small to hold it. "My dad had that necklace," she whispered. Ronan's hand froze in midair. Behind him, he heard Wraith's boots stop on the concrete, heard Torch exhale sharply, heard Grit mutter something in Spanish that sounded like a question nobody wanted answered. 5 men froze. Because Ronan knew, they all knew, exactly what that necklace was. They knew how many existed, they knew who had carried them, and they knew, with the kind of certainty that lives in bone marrow, that every man who'd ever worn one was dead. Every single one. 12 necklaces forged in a machine shop outside of Kandahar by a welder named Marcus Pruitt who'd melted down shell casings to make the frames. 12 coins pressed from salvaged silver. 12 men from a unit that had no official name, no service record, no acknowledgement from any branch of any government. They'd gone in together. 3 came out. The rest were listed as training accidents, administrative discharges, or simply erased. Ronan was one of the 3. Wraith was another. The third, a man named Jonas Beck, had put a gun in his mouth in a parking lot in New Mexico 11 years ago. Ronan had been the one to find him. That left 2 necklaces in the world. 2. Ronan wore one. Wraith kept his in a lockbox he'd never opened since the funeral. So whose necklace had this girl's father worn? "What's your name?" Ronan's voice had changed. The roughness was still there, but underneath it was something else now, something sharp and careful, like a man walking through a minefield he thought had been cleared. "Lila," the girl said. "Lila Mercer." Mercer. The name hit Ronan like a fist to the sternum. He didn't show it. Decades of training had taught him to absorb impact without visible reaction. But inside, something that had been sealed shut for 25 years cracked open like a fault line. David Mercer, codename Shepard, the unit's intelligence officer, the one who always knew where the exits were, who memorized maps the way other people memorized phone numbers, who could talk his way through a checkpoint in 4 languages and fight his way through it in silence. David had been listed as killed during extraction, body never recovered. File closed, case sealed. Ronan had carried that weight for a quarter-century, had dreamed about it, had sat in parking lots at 3 in the morning staring at nothing, replaying the moment he'd been ordered to leave David behind. And now a little girl in the rain was telling him David had survived. "Your dad," Ronan said, each word measured. "What was his name?" David Mercer." Wraith appeared at Ronan's shoulder. His face was unreadable, but his hands were shaking. "Ronan, I heard her. That's not possible." "I know." Delilah's crying had slowed to something quieter. Not calm, but exhausted, the way grief sounds when a body runs out of energy to sustain it. She was still staring at the necklace. "He told me," she said, her voice cracking on every other word. "He told me if anything ever happened, if he didn't come home, I had to find the men with the wolf necklace. He said they'd keep me safe." The rain kept falling. Somewhere in the distance, thunder rolled across the mountains like a door closing. Ronan didn't look at the others. He didn't need to. He could feel their silence the way you feel a change in air pressure before a storm. Heavy, charged, waiting for direction. He held out the jacket again. This time, Lila took it. They brought her under the canopy. Sully wrapped her in a thermal blanket from his kit and checked her pulse, her temperature, her pupils. His hands were steady now. The shaking stopped whenever there was someone to save. Grit heated water on a small camp stove and made instant coffee, handing a cup to Ronan and a cup of warm broth to the girl. Torch stood at the perimeter, scanning the road in both directions with the focus of a man who expected trouble. Wraith pulled Ronan aside 10 feet from the others. His voice was barely above a whisper. "David Mercer is dead. We watched the building collapse." "We watched a building collapse," Ronan corrected. "We never saw a body." "The file said..." The file said whatever someone wanted it to say. You know how that works. Wraith's jaw tightened. So what? He's been alive this whole time, hiding, while we... He stopped himself, swallowed. While we carried that? Ronan didn't answer. He walked back to Lila. She was sitting on an overturned crate, the blanket wrapped around her small frame. The stuffed rabbit propped on her knee. She hadn't touched the broth. Her eyes were fixed on the middle distance, the 1,000-yard stare that Ronan had seen on soldiers, on refugees, on people who'd been through enough that their minds decided to temporarily check out. He crouched in front of her. The knee screamed again. He ignored it. Lila, where's your dad now? Gone. The word came out flat. No emotion left. 6 months ago. He went to a meeting and didn't come back. What kind of meeting? I don't know. He never told me the bad stuff. He said I was too young for the bad stuff. She paused. But I heard him on the phone. He sounded scared. My dad never sounded scared. Ronan felt Wraith's eyes on his back. He kept his focus on the girl. Where have you been living since then? With Mrs. Hernandez, our neighbor. She said she'd watch me until Dad came back. But then the men came. What men? Lila's grip on the rabbit tightened until her knuckles went white. They wore suits. They had badges. They said they were from the government. They told Mrs. Hernandez I had to go with them because I was a witness to a crime. She looked up at Ronan with eyes far too old for her face. I didn't witness any crime. I know you didn't. Mrs. Hernandez tried to stop them. She told them she needed to see paperwork. They got angry. One of them pushed her. Lila's voice went very quiet. She fell. She's old. She uses a cane. She fell, and they didn't even help her up. Sully had stopped checking the medical kit. His back was to them, but his shoulders had gone rigid. The posture of a man hearing something that was activating every protective instinct in his body. How'd you get away? Ronan asked. Dad taught me. He always said if bad people come and I can't find him, go out the back window, drop to the garage roof, slide to the fence, run for the wash behind the development. She said it mechanically, like she'd rehearsed it 100 times. Because she had. He made me practice. David Mercer. Always planning. Always 3 moves ahead, even when it came to his own daughter's escape route. How long have you been running? 3 days, I think, maybe 4. I lost count. 4 days. An 8-year-old girl alone in the Arizona desert in October with nothing but a stuffed animal and her father's paranoia to keep her alive. The fact that she was still breathing was either a miracle or a testament to exactly how well David Mercer had trained her. Probably both. Do you know where your dad might be? Ronan asked. Did he ever mention a safe place? Somewhere he'd go if... The cabin, Lila said immediately. He said there was a cabin in the mountains. He said only the wolf necklace men knew about it. He told me the name once. She squeezed her eyes shut, concentrating. Brimstone Ridge? The name landed like a grenade. Ronan stood up slowly. His face showed nothing. But Wraith, watching from the shadows, saw his hands curl into fists at his sides. The involuntary reaction of a man whose past had just reached out and grabbed him by the throat. Brimstone Ridge, the safe house, the off-grid cabin their unit had maintained in the Chiricahua Mountains for exactly the kind of worst-case scenario that nobody ever believed would actually happen. Ronan hadn't been there in over 20 years. He'd assumed it had rotted into the mountainside by now. She knows about Brimstone, Wraith said from behind him, his voice thin. Yeah. Nobody knows about Brimstone. We never told anyone. Not wives, not chaplains, not command. I know. So either David Mercer told his 8-year-old daughter about a classified safe house. He told her because he knew this was coming, Ronan finished. He told her because he knew eventually she'd need to find us. Silence. Heavy, thick, full of implications none of them were ready to process. Grit broke it. So what do we do? It was the simplest question in the world, and the most complicated, because what they should do was call the authorities, hand the girl over to Child Protective Services, and ride away. Let the system handle it. Let the proper channels do their job. But the proper channels had already sent men in suits to drag an 8-year-old out of the only safe home she had left. The proper channels had already pushed an elderly woman to the floor. The proper channels were the reason this girl was standing barefoot in the rain on a dead highway in the middle of the night. Ronan had spent his entire adult life watching proper channels fail the people who needed them most. "We take her with us," he said. "Ronan," Torch started. "We take her with us. We go to Brimstone Ridge. We find out what David left behind. And we figure out who's hunting this kid and why. And if they find us first?" Ronan looked at Torch, then at Wraith, Sully, Grit. 5 men standing in a circle of weak flashlight under a leaking roof in the desert. 5 men who'd been thrown away by every institution that was supposed to protect them. 5 men who had nothing left except each other and the road. Then they find out why they should have left her alone. Nobody argued. They loaded up in silence. Sully adjusted the thermal blanket around Lila and secured her on the back of Ronan's bike with bungee straps from Torch's saddlebag. She weighed nothing. Her arms barely reached around Ronan's midsection. The stuffed rabbit was tucked inside the leather jacket she still wore. Ronan felt her small hands grip the fabric of his flannel shirt, felt her forehead press against his back. He hadn't been trusted by anything this small in a very long time. The engines fired in sequence. Ronan first, then Wraith, Torch, Sully, Grit. 5 throttles opened against the rain. 5 headlights cut into the darkness. They pulled onto Route 191 heading south toward the Chiricahua Mountains, toward a cabin that shouldn't exist, toward answers that had been buried for 25 years. Behind them, less than a mile up the road, a pair of headlights that had been sitting dark on the shoulder suddenly flicked on. A black SUV pulled onto the highway. No plates, no markings, tinted windows catching the lightning like dead eyes. It followed at a distance, patient, practiced. And inside it, a man picked up a satellite phone and spoke 4 words. "They have the girl." They rode for 2 hours through rain that refused to quit. Lila fell asleep against Ronan's back somewhere around mile 30, her grip loosening, her breathing slowing into the shallow rhythm of a child whose body had finally overruled her fear. He felt the change the way you feel a bird land on your shoulder, something impossibly light choosing to trust you with its weight. He didn't adjust his posture, didn't shift, rode with his spine locked straight so she wouldn't slide, absorbing every pothole and road seam through his legs instead of his torso. His knee sent white-hot signals up his thigh with every bump. He ignored them the way he'd been ignoring pain since he was 19 years old. The black SUV stayed behind them. Ronan had spotted it within the first 10 minutes. Wraith confirmed it through the helmet comm at minute 15. Torch clocked it at 20. By the time they hit the junction where 191 met the county road that wound into the foothills, all 5 of them knew. Nobody said anything over the comms. They didn't need to. 25 years of shared silence had built a language that didn't require words. Ronan tapped his left brake twice, slow, deliberate, the signal for, "I see it, hold formation, don't react." The SUV maintained a half-mile distance, never closer, never farther. Professional spacing, the kind of gap maintained by people who'd been trained in vehicular surveillance and didn't care if you knew they were there. That bothered Ronan more than the following itself. Amateurs try to hide. Professionals who let you see them are sending a message. "We know where you are. We're not worried about it." At the Wilcox Junction, Ronan pulled the formation into a truck stop, a 24-hour diesel island sitting beneath buzzing fluorescent lights that turned everything the color of old teeth. A handful of long-haul rigs idled in the lot, their running lights glowing like sleeping animals. The diner attached to the fuel station had a cracked window patched with duct tape and a neon sign that read "Open" in letters that flickered like a dying heartbeat. The SUV drove past without slowing, disappeared east into the dark. "Gone," Grit said, pulling off his helmet. "No," Ronan said, "repositioned." He carried Lila inside. She woke when the fluorescent light hit her face, but didn't cry, didn't speak, just blinked at the water-stained ceiling tiles like she was cataloging her surroundings, assessing exits, measuring distances. An 8-year-old running tactical awareness in a truck stop diner at 2 in the morning. David Mercer had trained her well. That fact made Ronan's chest ache in ways he couldn't name. They took a booth in the back corner. Wraith sat facing the door. Torch took the counter, positioned to watch the parking lot through the window. Grit posted outside, leaning against the wall near the entrance with a cigarette and a line of sight that covered the access road in both directions. Sully slid into the booth next to Lila and began checking her feet. The scratches were shallow but numerous, and 2 of her toenails were black from impact. "She needs shoes," Sully said, "and calories, and about 40 hours of sleep. She needs to not be sitting in a truck stop with 5 men who have no legal claim to her," Wraith said from across the table. His voice was flat, controlled. The voice of a man choosing his words the way a surgeon chooses instruments. Ronan looked at him. "Say what you're saying." "I'm saying what I'm saying. We have an unaccompanied minor, no guardianship documents, no authorization from any agency. 5 men with rap sheets that include dismissed charges. That include arrests, Ronan. Arrests that show up on background checks. Arrests that look a certain way when you're a 53-year-old man traveling with someone else's 8-year-old daughter in the middle of the night." Wraith leaned forward. His eyes had that hollow light they got when he was calculating worst-case scenarios. "If the wrong cop pulls us over, we don't get to explain. We get separated, processed, and she ends up exactly where those suits wanted her." The waitress appeared, a woman in her 60s with nicotine-stained fingers and eyes that had stopped being curious about strangers a long time ago. She set down waters without asking and took orders without writing them down. Coffee, toast, scrambled eggs for the girl. She glanced at Lila once, then at Ronan, and whatever she saw in his face made her decide it wasn't her business. Smart woman. After she left, the silence at the table became its own presence. Lila was drawing shapes in the condensation on her water glass. Circles inside circles inside circles. "Wraith's got a point," Torch said from the counter without turning around. "I love what we're doing. I hate how it looks." "Since when do we care how things look?" Sully asked. "Since there's a child involved. Since the stakes aren't about us anymore." Ronan pulled the necklace from beneath his shirt and set it on the table. The challenge coin caught the fluorescent light. The wolf's head engraved with lines so fine they looked almost alive. The 13 stars arranged in a pattern that corresponded to grid coordinates nobody had used in 25 years. "Lila," he said quietly, "you said your dad had one of these. Can you tell me what was written on the inside of it?" Wraith's head snapped toward him. "Ronan, don't—" "What was written on the inside?" Lila looked at the necklace, then at Ronan. Then she closed her eyes, and when she spoke, her voice carried the mechanical precision of something she'd been made to memorize. "Through the wolf's teeth, past the last fire. Home." Nobody breathed, because that phrase, those exact words in that exact order, had never been written down. Not in any file, not in any report, not in any debrief. It was the unit's verbal extraction code, spoken only in the field, known only to the 12 men who carried those coins. It wasn't engraved inside any necklace. It existed only in the memory of men who'd used it to identify each other in the dark, when identity was the difference between rescue and a bullet. David Mercer hadn't just told his daughter about the necklace. He'd given her the key. "That's enough," Wraith said. He stood up from the booth, his chair scraping the tile floor with a sound like tearing fabric. "Outside, now." Ronan looked at Sully. "Stay with her." "Copy." The cold hit them the moment they stepped through the diner's side door. October in the high desert, the kind of cold that didn't announce itself but found its way through every gap in your clothing and settled against your skin like a promise. Grit was already there, cigarette half finished, his eyes tracking something in the parking lot that turned out to be a stray dog moving between the rigs. Wraith walked 15 feet from the building, turned and faced Ronan. His breath came out in visible clouds. His fists were at his sides. Not clenched, but not relaxed either. Somewhere in between. The posture of a man fighting himself. "How does she know that phrase?" Her father told her. "Her father is dead." "You don't know that." "I know what the file says." "The file is a lie. You know that too. You've always known." Wraith's jaw worked side to side, grinding something that wasn't food. 20 years of suppressed fury moving through his teeth like voltage through a wire. "You want to say something," Ronan told him. "Say it." "You left him." There it was. The thing that had been sitting in the room for 2 decades. The unspoken accusation that had shaped every interaction between these two men since the night they'd crawled out of a collapsing building in a province that didn't exist on any map. You were team lead, Wraith continued, his voice dropping low enough that Grit, 10 feet away, leaned in to hear. You made the call. You said he was gone. You said the building was compromised. You ordered us out. I did. And now a little girl is telling us he survived, that he's been alive this whole time, that he spent 25 years hiding from something while I... Wraith stopped. His breath was coming faster now. His hands were shaking again, the way they'd shaken in the truck stop, in the dark, in every quiet moment when his body remembered what his mind tried to forget. I named my son after him. Did you know that? Ronan didn't answer. David. I named my boy David, after a dead man who wasn't dead, after a ghost who was out there living a whole life, getting married, having a kid, buying a house, while I was drinking myself through 3 divorces and sleeping in my truck because I couldn't close my eyes without hearing that building come down. Grit flicked his cigarette into the gravel. His face was stone, but his eyes were moving between the two men with the alertness of someone who'd seen this kind of detonation before and knew how it ended. I made the call based on what I knew, Ronan said. His voice was steady, but his hands were in his jacket pockets, hidden, and if anyone had looked closely, they would have seen the fabric moving where his fingers trembled. The structure was failing. We had 90 seconds. I counted heads, and David wasn't among them. Did you go back? There was no time to... Did you go back? Silence. The stray dog had stopped near the dumpster, watching them with the detached interest of a creature that understood conflict but had no stake in its outcome. No, Ronan said. Wraith nodded slowly. Not acceptance. Acknowledgement. The way a man nods when the thing he always suspected is finally confirmed. Then we carry that, Wraith said. Both of us. Not just me. Both. I've been carrying it. Not the same way. You carried the decision. I carried the face. Wraith's voice cracked on the last word. A fracture so small you'd miss it if you weren't listening for it. I was the last one to see him alive. He looked at me, right at me, and I kept running. Torch had come outside at some point. He stood near the wall, arms crossed, rain dripping from the canopy edge onto his boots. He didn't interrupt. None of them did. This was between Ronan and Wraith, a wound that had been infected for 25 years and was finally being lanced in a truck stop parking lot at 3 in the morning while a little girl ate scrambled eggs inside and a black SUV circled somewhere in the dark. We can't change what happened, Ronan said. No, but we can stop pretending it didn't. Fine, it happened. I left David Mercer in a collapsing building because I was scared and I wanted to live. Is that what you need to hear? It's what I needed you to say out loud. One time, in front of witnesses. Ronan met Wraith's eyes, 2 men who'd been through things that would have broken most people, standing in the cold, finally saying the thing that had been corroding them from the inside like acid through metal. Now what? Grit asked. Now we go find out what he left for us, Wraith said. He looked at Ronan. Brimstone Ridge, I assume you still know the way. I could drive it blind. That's what I'm afraid of. They went back inside. The food had arrived. Lila was eating the scrambled eggs with the focused intensity of someone who hadn't had a real meal in days. Sully sat beside her, not talking, just present. The way a good medic is present, filling the space with something that isn't medical but is still therapeutic. Steady breathing, calm hands, the radiation of a person who has decided that nothing bad is going to happen on their watch. Ronan sat across from Lila and drank his coffee. Black, lukewarm, the kind of coffee that doesn't taste like anything except the hour you're drinking it at. Lila, those men who came to Mrs. Hernandez's house, the ones with badges, did they say what agency they were from? FBI. Did they show credentials, like an ID card with a photo? Lila thought. One of them did, but it was fast. He just flipped it open and closed. Mrs. Hernandez asked to see it again, and that's when he got mad. You remember what he looked like? Tall, short hair. He had a scar on his neck here. She touched the right side of her own neck, just below the jaw. And his shoes were wrong. Every man at the table looked at her. Wrong how? Sully asked. FBI agents on TV wear dress shoes. These were boots, military boots. Dad showed me the difference once. He said if someone comes to your door saying they're a federal agent and they're wearing military boots, they're lying. Ronan and Wraith exchanged a glance, the kind of glance that contains an entire conversation compressed into 2 seconds. Military boots. Not federal agents, private contractors. Mercenaries wearing agency credentials the way a wolf wears sheep's clothing, not to become the sheep, but to get close enough to the flock. How many of them? Ronan asked. 3 at the house. But there were more. I saw 2 more cars on the street, black cars. Like the one... She stopped. Her fork froze halfway to her mouth. Like the one that was behind us tonight. She'd noticed. 8 years old, and she'd noticed the tail. David Mercer hadn't just trained his daughter to escape. He'd trained her to see. Ronan reached across the table and gently took the fork from her hand before she dropped it. They're gone now. We made sure. They're not gone, Lila said. Dad said they never stop. He said they're patient. He said that's what makes them scary. Not the guns. The patience. The diner was quiet except for the hum of a refrigerator and the distant rumble of a diesel engine warming up outside. The waitress had retreated behind the counter, watching a small television mounted on a wall bracket with the sound turned off. A late-night news broadcast scrolled information across the bottom of the screen. Torch was the one who saw it. He'd been watching the parking lot, but his eyes drifted to the television for a moment. The casual glance of a man looking for something to distract him from the weight of the conversation. Then his body went rigid. He turned fully toward the screen. His hand came up and gripped the edge of the counter hard enough that his knuckles popped. Ronan! Something in his voice made everyone turn. The news crawl at the bottom of the screen was running a regional alert. Torch couldn't hear the audio, but the text was clear enough. Amber alert, Cochise County. Leila Mercer, 8, missing. Last seen October 14th. Believed abducted by unidentified male suspects. Armed and dangerous. Motorcycle description pending. Ronan read it twice. The second time was worse than the first. They flipped it, Wraith said quietly. They turned it around. We're not rescuing her. According to that, we took her. That's not, Grit started. Doesn't matter what it is, matters what it looks like. Every cop in southern Arizona is going to be looking for a group of bikers with a missing 8-year-old girl. And they're not going to ask questions before they draw. Lila had seen it too. She couldn't read the crawl from this distance, but she could read the faces of 5 men who'd just realized the trap they were in. They always do this, she said softly. Dad said they make you look like the bad guy, so nobody helps you. The waitress was looking at the screen now, then at the table in the back, then at the screen again. Her hand moved slowly beneath the counter toward something they couldn't see. Time to go, Ronan said. They moved. Not running. Moving with the controlled urgency of men who understood that panic gets people killed. Sully scooped Lila up and carried her toward the side exit. Torch dropped a $50 bill on the counter without looking at the waitress. Wraith held the door. Grit was already at the bikes, helmets ready. The waitress's hand came up from beneath the counter holding a phone. She was dialing before they reached the parking lot. 90 seconds. That's what they had. 90 seconds before a 911 dispatcher answered. Another 60 before the nearest unit was alerted. Maybe 10 minutes before lights and sirens materialized on the access road. 10 minutes to disappear. Ronan strapped Lila onto his bike. His hands were shaking now, not from cold, not from fear, but from the chemical surge of a body that had been trained to operate under threat and was doing exactly what it was built to do. "Com check," he said. "Wraith, good. Torch, good. Sully, clear. Grit, let's ride." 5 engines shattered the quiet. 5 headlights blazed. They pulled out of the lot heading south on a county road that didn't have a name, only a number, and within 2 minutes the truck stop was a smudge of light in the mirrors. Ronan killed his headlight. The others followed. 5 motorcycles running dark through the desert on a road lit only by whatever the cloud-choked moon could offer. Lila pressed her face against his back. Her small hands gripped his shirt. The stuffed rabbit was jammed between them, its waterlogged body cold against Ronan's spine. "Are we the bad guys now?" she asked. Her voice was muffled by leather and wind, barely audible over the engines. Ronan didn't answer for a long time. The road unspooled beneath them like a ribbon of shadow. "No," he said finally. "We're just the ones nobody's going to believe." They rode south through the darkness, 5 invisible machines moving through a landscape that didn't care about guilt or innocence, toward mountains that held secrets older than any of them. And somewhere behind them, 10 miles back, 20, impossible to know, a satellite phone connected to a frequency that didn't exist on any civilian spectrum. "Team 2 is in position at the access road. Team 3 is covering the eastern ridge." A pause. Static. "And the cabin?" "Wired. If they set foot inside Brimstone Ridge, we'll know within 30 seconds. Another pause. Longer this time. "Let them come. Let them find whatever Mercer left. And when they have it in their hands—" The voice stopped. Recalibrated. When it continued, it carried the cold patience that Lila had described. The patience that was scarier than guns. "Take the necklace. Eliminate the rest. The girl included." The line went dead. The desert swallowed the silence and kept it. They reached Brimstone Ridge at dawn. The cabin sat at the end of a dirt road that hadn't been maintained in 2 decades. Ruts deep enough to swallow a tire, branches clawing at handlebars, loose shale sliding beneath wheels like the mountain itself was trying to push them back. The last mile took 40 minutes. Grit's bike nearly went down twice on a switchback so tight the rear wheel hung over empty air for a heartbeat before the tread caught. Lila was awake. She'd been awake since they'd left the paved road, her body rigid against Ronan's back, her head turning left and right with the systematic scanning of someone who'd been taught to watch tree lines. She hadn't spoken in 3 hours. The cabin materialized through morning fog like something surfacing from deep water. Single story. Log construction with a corrugated metal roof stained orange with rust. A porch that sagged at one corner. Windows intact, but so layered with dust and pollen they looked frosted. No power lines. No mailbox. No sign that anything human had visited in years, except for the padlock on the front door. It was new. Brushed steel, barely weathered, the kind you bought at a hardware store for $12. Everything around it was decaying. The padlock gleamed. Wraith saw it first. He held up a fist. Stop, and dismounted without cutting his engine. The Harley idled beneath him like a breathing animal while he approached the porch on foot, his boots silent on the packed earth. He studied the lock, then the door frame, then the ground. "Someone's been here," he said. "Recently. Weeks, not months. Footprints in the dirt under the overhang. Size 11 boots, single set, no return track on the same path." "Meaning he went in and came out a different way," Torch said. "Meaning he didn't want anyone to know how many times he'd visited." Ronan killed his engine and lifted Lila off the bike. Her legs buckled when her feet hit the ground. Stiffness, exhaustion, the accumulated damage of 4 days of running, and a night of riding through the desert on the back of a motorcycle. Sully caught her before she went down and carried her to the porch steps. "I know this place," Lila said quietly. She was staring at the cabin with an expression that didn't belong on a child's face. A mixture of recognition and dread, the look of someone returning to a location that holds both safety and terrible memory. "Dad brought me here once, at night. He told me to memorize the way the door sounds when it opens." "Why the door sound?" Sully asked. "He said every door in the world sounds different. He said if I ever heard that exact sound, I'd know I was in the right place." Ronan pulled the padlock. It was combination, not keyed. He looked at Lila. 773-1, she said without hesitation. The lock opened with a click that echoed in the morning quiet. Ronan pulled the hasp free and pushed the door inward. The hinges groaned, a low, sustained complaint that seemed to come from the wood itself, from the bones of a building that had been holding its breath for years. Lila nodded. "That's the sound." The interior was exactly as Ronan remembered, and nothing like he remembered. The layout was the same. Single room divided by function rather than walls. A wood stove in the center, a sleeping platform against the back wall, a rough-hewn table near the window. But the contents had changed. Where there had once been military surplus cots and ammunition crates, there were now file boxes. Dozens of them. Stacked against every wall, floor to chest height, each one labeled with dates spanning 2 decades. And in the center of the table, sitting in a ring of cleared dust like an offering on an altar, was a metal lockbox. Military grade. Fireproof. The kind issued to intelligence officers for field-sensitive materials. Ronan approached it slowly. His boots on the plank floor sounded like a heartbeat. The other 4 spread through the room without being told. Wraith covering the back window, Torch checking the corners, Grit standing in the doorway with his eyes on the tree line, Sully keeping Lila on the porch. The lockbox had a latch, not a lock. It opened without resistance. Inside, resting on foam padding cut to its exact dimensions, was a necklace. The same necklace. Wolf's head. 13 stars. Hand-forged steel frame around a silver challenge coin. This one was in better condition than Ronan's. The edges sharper, the engraving deeper, as though it had been preserved rather than worn. A museum piece instead of a survivor's talisman. Beneath it lay a leather journal. Thick, battered, pages swollen with handwriting so dense it looked like the words were trying to escape the margins. And beneath the journal, a photograph. Ronan picked it up. His hands were steady until he saw the image, and then they weren't. 12 men standing in front of a hangar in an unnamed desert. Young, armed, wearing fatigues that bore no insignia, no flag, no identification of any kind. Their faces were sunburned and exhausted and alive with the particular energy of men who believe they're doing something that matters. Ronan was on the far left, 26 years old, lean, clean-shaven, eyes that hadn't yet learned to look through people instead of at them. Wraith stood 2 men to his right, younger and somehow softer, a version of himself that the current Wraith would barely recognize. And in the center of the group, one hand raised in a casual wave, stood David Mercer. Ronan stared at the face for a long time, longer than he should have, long enough for Wraith to cross the room and look over his shoulder. "He kept it," Wraith said. "All of it." "Yeah." "Open the journal." Ronan didn't move. His thumb rested on the leather cover the way a man rests his hand on a coffin lid, wanting to open it, terrified of what's inside. "Open it," Wraith said again. Not a request. Ronan opened it. The first page was dated 9 years ago. The handwriting was small, meticulous, and shaking. The ink changed color every few pages. Blue, black, blue again. The mark of a man who wrote whenever he could with whatever he had. The opening line was addressed to Ronan. "If you're reading this, I'm dead or close enough that the difference doesn't matter. I'm sorry for the lie. I'm sorry for 25 years of silence. But I need you to understand what I found and why I couldn't tell anyone until I had enough proof to make it stick." Ronan read the next 3 pages, standing in the center of that cabin while dust motes floated through morning light, and Lila hummed quietly to herself on the porch, and the mountain held its breath around them. What the journal described was meticulous, clinical, the language of an intelligence officer who had spent decades compiling evidence the way other men spent decades building a house, brick by brick, document by document, connection by connection. The military unit they'd served in, the one with no name, no record, no acknowledgement, had been created for a purpose its members were never told. They'd believed they were running classified rescue operations, extracting hostages, saving lives. And they had been. But the operations served a secondary function that none of them knew about. Every site they'd hit, every compound they'd breached, every document they'd seized, someone else had been there first. Copying files, lifting financial records, building a parallel archive of criminal infrastructure that spanned 4 continents. Their missions hadn't been rescue operations. They'd been collection runs, intelligence harvest disguised as humanitarian extractions. And the people running the program had used 12 men's genuine desire to save lives as cover for building one of the largest criminal intelligence databases ever assembled. When the program was shut down, the database didn't disappear. It was privatized. Sold to a network of former military intelligence operators who'd realized that the information they'd collected, financial records, trafficking routes, arms shipments, bribery chains, wasn't just evidence of crime. It was a blueprint for crime. The network had spent 25 years using that blueprint, building operations on the exact infrastructure the 12 men had originally exposed, running trafficking routes that the unit had mapped, exploiting financial channels that the unit had documented. Every rescue mission they'd run had provided the roadmap for the very evil they thought they were fighting. David Mercer had discovered this by accident, a face in a news report, a name in a financial filing, a shipping route that matched exactly the extraction path from a mission in 2001. He'd pulled the thread, and the thread had unraveled into a web that connected military contractors, intelligence brokers, and criminal operators across 3 decades. Ronan closed the journal. His face was the color of old concrete. "What is it?" Torch asked from the corner. Ronan didn't answer. He handed the journal to Wraith, who read the first 5 pages in silence, his eyes tracking across the handwriting with increasing speed. When he finished, he set the journal down on the table with exaggerated care, the deliberate gentleness of a man preventing himself from throwing it through the wall. "They used us," Wraith said. "What do you mean?" Grit stepped inside from the doorway. "I mean every mission we ran, every building we cleared, every person we pulled out of a hole in the ground. It was a cover. Someone was behind us, copying everything we found, and they built an empire on it." Grit looked at Ronan. "Is that true?" "According to David. David's a ghost who's been lying to us for 25 years. Why do we believe him now? Because he left his daughter standing in the rain with nothing but a stuffed rabbit and a prayer that we'd show up." Ronan's voice was quiet, but it carried a weight that silenced the room. "A man doesn't do that unless the thing he's running from is real." Torch had picked up the journal and was flipping through later pages. His face was changing, tightening, the expression of a man watching a car accident develop in slow motion. "There are names in here," Torch said, "real names. Military contractors, intelligence officers, people who are—" He stopped, read something again. "Ronan, page 62. Ronan took the journal, found the page. The handwriting here was different from the rest. Hurried, jagged, written in what looked like the middle of the night by a hand that was no longer steady. The entry was dated 4 months ago. "The network knows I'm alive. I don't know how. Maybe I got careless. Maybe they've been watching longer than I thought. I have to move Lila somewhere safe. Mrs. Hernandez will take her. She's a good woman. She doesn't know anything, and that's what will protect her. The necklace is the key. Not the one in the lockbox. Ronan's. The one he's been wearing around his neck for 25 years. The frame I built for his coin. I modified it before Kandahar. There's a micro drive embedded in the steel casing. 16 gigabytes. I've been uploading encrypted files to it remotely every time Ronan's phone connected to a network near the necklace's passive receiver. He doesn't know. He can't know. If he knew, they'd come for him instead of me. The lockbox necklace is the authentication key. Both necklaces together unlock the full archive. Every document, every financial record, every name, every operation. Without both, the data is noise. I'm sorry, brother. I used you. I turned your loyalty into a hiding place. But I didn't have anyone else I trusted enough to carry it without knowing. Ronan read it twice. Then he reached up and gripped the necklace around his neck. The silver coin. The hand-forged frame. The weight he'd carried against his chest for 25 years, pressing against his sternum with every heartbeat, warm from his body heat, shaped by his sweat, worn smooth by his fingers in moments of anxiety and grief and the long, dark hours between midnight and dawn. David Mercer had turned him into a vault, without his knowledge, without his consent. Every time Ronan had walked into a coffee shop and connected to Wi-Fi, every time he'd checked his phone at a gas station, every time he'd sat in a VA waiting room with his phone in his pocket and the necklace against his skin, the necklace had been receiving data, silently, continuously, for years. His most sacred possession, the only physical connection to the men he'd lost, to the brotherhood that had defined his life, to the mission he'd believed in with every cell of his body, was a surveillance device, and the man who'd built it was the man he'd spent 25 years mourning. "Son of a bitch," Ronan whispered. not in anger, in something deeper, something that didn't have a name because it occupied the space between betrayal and understanding, between fury and grief, between the desire to destroy the necklace and the knowledge that doing so would erase the only weapon that could bring down the people who'd used them all. Wraith was watching him. Everyone was watching him. "He used you," Wraith said. His voice held no judgment, just recognition. The flat acknowledgement of one wounded man identifying a wound in another. He used all of us. Every mission, every extraction. He knew. He figured it out years before the rest of us, and instead of telling us, he went underground and built a case. Alone. Alone. While we thought he was dead. While we carried him like weight in our chests. Ronan stopped. His hand was still gripping the necklace. His knuckles were white. While I named the guilt after him, made it about leaving him behind, built my whole broken life around the idea that I'd failed David Mercer, and this whole time he was alive, using me as a goddamn hard drive. Sully appeared in the doorway. "Lila's asking what's happening. What do I tell her?" "Tell her we're figuring it out. She's scared." "She should be." Silence. Thick as smoke. The morning light had shifted, coming through the dusty windows at an angle that turned the file boxes along the walls into something that looked like headstones, rows of identical shapes holding the names of the dead. "There's more," Torch said. He'd continued reading while the others processed. His voice had the tone of a man delivering a medical diagnosis, factual, stripped of emotion, because the facts themselves were devastating enough. The last entry, 2 days before his estimated disappearance. He read aloud. "They've compromised the federal response. The men they'll send won't be FBI. They'll carry badges, but they'll answer to the network. If Lila runs, they'll issue an Amber Alert and turn the search into a weapon. Every cop in the state will become their eyes. The only people who can get her through this are the ones who operate outside the system. Ronan, Wraith, the others. They don't know it yet, but they're the only clean hands left." Grit kicked the door frame. Not hard. Just enough to make it shake. "So we're part of his plan. All of it. The girl finding us. The necklace. This cabin." He set the whole thing up like a goddamn chess match, and we're the pieces. "He set it up because he had no other option," Ronan said. The words cost him something. Everyone in the room could see the price on his face. He was dying or captured or both, and he needed someone to finish it. Someone who wouldn't sell it, someone who couldn't be bought because they had nothing left to buy. "Flattering," Wraith said dryly. "Accurate." A sound from outside, distant but distinct. The chop of a helicopter, low altitude, moving fast. Everyone froze. Grit was at the window in 2 strides. He pressed himself against the wall and peered through the gap between the frame and the dusty glass. Black, no markings. Military profile. It's doing a grid search pattern over the valley. How far? 2 miles, maybe less. Moving this direction. Torch was already at the table, shoving the journal and the lockbox necklace into a saddlebag. "They wired this place." That's what the voice on the phone said. "If they set foot inside, we'll know within 30 seconds. We've been inside for 20 minutes. The realization hit like cold water. They knew. The network knew the Brotherhood was here, had known from the moment Ronan opened the door. Every second they'd spent reading the journal, processing the betrayal, arguing about trust. Every second had been tracked. "Move," Ronan said. The word cut through the room like a blade. "Now. Leave everything that isn't essential. Sully, get Lila on my bike. Torch, kill anything electronic you can find. Phones, anything in the walls, anything that looks like it doesn't belong." Torch swept the room with combat efficiency, ripping open junction boxes, pulling wire clusters from behind wall panels. He found it in 90 seconds, a small transmitter no bigger than a deck of cards, hardwired to a battery pack, tucked behind the wood stove. Military specification. The kind that transmitted GPS coordinates on a burst frequency every 15 seconds. He crushed it under his boot. The plastic cracked with a sound like breaking teeth. "That buys us minutes," he said. "Not more." They were out the door and on the bikes in under 2 minutes. Lila was strapped to Ronan's back, the leather jacket zipped around both of them. The stuffed rabbit was pressed between their bodies. Her face was buried in his shoulder. Ronan, her voice was muffled, small. Are the bad men coming? Yeah, sweetheart, they're coming. What are we going to do? Ronan started the engine. The Harley roared beneath them, vibrating through his bones, through hers, through the mountain air. We're going to do what your dad asked us to do. We're going to finish it. 5 bikes tore down the dirt road, throwing gravel and dust into the morning light. The helicopter's chop was louder now. Closer, directional, no longer searching but tracking. Tree cover kept them invisible for the first half-mile, but the canopy was thinning as they descended toward the valley floor. Wraith pulled alongside Ronan. His visor was up. His face was a mask of controlled fury, the expression of a man who'd been manipulated by a dead friend and hunted by an invisible enemy and was now operating on nothing but instinct and the kind of anger that burns clean. The road forks in a quarter mile, Wraith shouted over the engines. East goes to the highway, west goes deeper into the mountains. Which way? Ronan's mind was running calculations at a speed that surprised even him. Highway meant visibility, exposure. Every cop in the state had their description. Every camera at every intersection was a trap. But the mountains were the enemy's territory. They'd had weeks, maybe months, to prepare the terrain. East, Ronan said, into the open. Are you insane? They expect us to hide. They've set this up for us to hide. Every trail, every back road, every canyon. They'll have it covered. The one thing they didn't plan for is 5 idiots riding straight into daylight. Wraith stared at him for a long beat. Then something shifted in his expression. Not agreement exactly, but the grim recognition of a man who understood that sometimes the worst plan was the only plan. If we die, I'm blaming you. Get in line. The fork appeared. 5 bikes banked east, toward the highway, toward the open desert, toward a world that had already been told they were the enemy. Behind them, the helicopter crested the ridgeline, and below them, at the base of the mountain where the dirt road met the paved county route, 3 black SUVs sat in a line across the road like a wall. Engines idling, doors opening, men stepping out with the unhurried precision of professionals who had anticipated exactly this move. Ronan counted them through the dust. 6 men. Body armor. Automatic weapons held at low ready. No badges, no insignia, no pretense. The road ahead was blocked. The sky behind was occupied. The mountain on either side was too steep for motorcycles. 5 bikes slowed. Engines dropped from roar to growl. Gravel crunched beneath tires as the formation came to a stop 200 yards from the blockade. Lila's arms tightened around Ronan's midsection. He could feel her heartbeat through the leather. Fast, small, the rhythm of a bird trapped inside a fist. Ronan, Sully's voice through the calm. Calm. Medic calm. The voice he used when the blood was already on the floor and the only thing left was deciding what to do next. Options. Ronan looked at the blockade, then at the helicopter hovering behind them, then at the mountainside where a narrow drainage culvert cut through the rock at an angle, barely wide enough for a bike, steep enough to kill anyone who misjudged it, invisible from the road unless you were looking at exactly the right angle. He'd hiked that culvert once, 23 years ago, on a training run, drunk, in the dark. He'd broken a rib on the rocks at the bottom and laughed about it for a week. He wasn't laughing now. Grit, you see that drainage cut at 2 o'clock? The suicide chute? Yeah, I see it. It drops into a wash on the other side of the ridge. The wash runs south for a mile and hits ranch land. From there, it's open desert to the interstate. And the part where the chute is a 40-degree grade covered in loose rock? That's the fun part. Grit was quiet for 3 seconds. Then, I hate you, old man. Wraith, take point. Torch, you're second. I'll run third with Lila. Sully and Grit, bring up the rear. When I say go, don't think, don't brake, commit and ride. 5 engines revved. The sound bounced off the mountainside and returned doubled, tripled. A wall of mechanical fury that made the air itself vibrate. The men at the blockade raised their weapons. The helicopter dropped lower. Ronan felt Lila press her face into his back so hard he could feel her teeth through the leather. Go. 5 bikes lunged toward the drainage cut like animals fleeing a fire. The blockade erupted. muzzle flashes popping in the morning light, rounds snapping through air and pinging off rock. Wraith hit the culvert entrance first, his front wheel leaving the ground for a sickening instant before slamming down onto loose shale. Torch followed, fishtailing, correcting, the burn scars on his arms flexing as he fought the handlebars. Ronan entered the chute at 40 miles an hour on a grade that wanted him dead. The Harley bucked beneath him like something alive and terrified. Rocks the size of fists hammered the undercarriage. The rear wheel spun, caught, spun again. Lila's weight shifted on every bounce, and he compensated with his core, his legs, his screaming knee, holding them both upright through pure stubbornness and the kind of muscle memory that doesn't come from training but from decades of refusing to fall. A round hit the rock face 3 feet to his left. Fragments peppered his shoulder. He didn't flinch. Couldn't afford to. One wrong input, and the bike would go sideways, and the mountain would finish what the bullet started. The chute narrowed. Walls closing in. Handlebars inches from stone on both sides. The sound was deafening. Engines, ricochets, helicopter rotors, Grit screaming something unintelligible over the comm. Then the grade leveled. Then the walls opened. Then they were through. 5 bikes exploding out of the drainage cut into a wide, dry wash, tires hitting sand, engines screaming, the mountain behind them cutting off the helicopter's line of sight like a door slamming shut. They didn't stop, didn't slow, didn't look back. They rode south through the wash at speeds that redefined reckless, sand spraying behind them in rooster tails, the morning sun hitting their faces for the first time in hours. Ronan's shoulder was bleeding where the rock fragments had hit. He could feel the warmth spreading down his arm beneath the leather. He didn't care. Didn't matter. Nothing mattered except the girl on his back and the necklace against his chest and the 16 gigabytes of evidence that a dead man had hidden inside the one thing Ronan would never take off. Behind him, through the comm, Sully's voice, breathless, rattled, alive. Grit's hit. Ronan's stomach dropped. How bad? Through and through, left arm. He's riding, but he's bleeding. Can he make the interstate? A pause, the sound of engines, the sound of wind, the sound of a young man breathing through clenched teeth. Then Grit's voice, tight with pain but steady. I'll make the interstate or I'll die trying. Either way, I'm not stopping. They rode on. 5 bikes in the desert, 1 bleeding, 1 carrying the most dangerous piece of evidence in the country against his chest. 1 carrying a girl who'd been orphaned by a conspiracy that spanned decades. And somewhere behind them, on a satellite phone that connected to a frequency that didn't exist, a voice was giving new orders. They escaped the cordon, all 5, heading south through the wash, redirect all assets to the interstate corridor, and contact our people inside the Bureau. A pause. It's time to upgrade the Amber Alert. Add armed and dangerous, add shoot on sight. The line went dead. And the desert, indifferent and ancient, watched 5 small machines racing across its face like sparks thrown from a fire, bright, desperate, and running out of road. Grit passed out at mile 6. His bike drifted left without warning, a slow, dreamlike lean that had nothing to do with the terrain and everything to do with the blood leaving his body faster than his heart could replace it. Sully saw it happen from 2 lengths back, the way a medic always sees the moment a man crosses the line between functioning and falling. He shouted into the comm, but the word came out as raw sound, not language, and by then Grit's left hand had already slipped off the handlebar. Torch saved him. He came in from the right, at a closing angle that should have been impossible at 60 miles an hour on loose sand, hooked his arm under Grit's chest, and held him upright for 300 yards, while both bikes wobbled and screamed beneath them. Grit's Harley finally tipped when Torch couldn't hold the weight any longer, sliding sideways in a spray of dust and metal that sounded like a building coming apart. Grit went with it, but Torch had already pulled him clear. The younger man's body limp, his left arm soaked dark from shoulder to fingertip, his face the color of wet ash. Ronan stopped the formation under a highway overpass where Interstate 10 crossed above a dry wash. Concrete pillars rose around them like the ribs of something enormous and dead. Traffic hummed overhead, the oblivious rhythm of a world that didn't know what was happening 30 feet below it. Sully had Grit on the ground in seconds. He cut the sleeve away with a folding knife and exposed the wound, a clean through and through in the meat of the upper arm, missing the bone by a finger's width, but the exit wound had torn the brachial artery's outer wall, and the bleeding was the kind that killed people in parking lots and alleyways while ambulances sat in traffic. Pressure here. Don't let go. Torch knelt and pressed both hands where Sully pointed. His burn-scarred forearms flexed. Blood welled between his fingers, warm and persistent. Sully worked with the focus of a man who'd done this in worse conditions with fewer supplies while people shot at him. Tourniquet first, a real one, from his kit, not a belt or a bootlace. Then hemostatic gauze packed into the exit wound with the careful brutality of someone who knows that gentleness right now means death later. Grit came to during the packing, his body arching off the ground, a sound coming from his throat that wasn't a scream, but something older and more animal. The involuntary protest of flesh being saved against its will. Hold him, Sully said. Wraith dropped onto Grit's legs. Ronan took his shoulders. Lila stood 10 feet away, her back pressed against a concrete pillar, the stuffed rabbit clutched to her chest, watching everything with eyes that had stopped being a child's eyes somewhere in the last 48 hours. Am I dying? Grit asked. His voice was conversational, almost amused, the chemical distance of shock. Not today, Sully said. Feels like today. Shut up and let me work. Sully closed the wound with butterfly strips and wrapped it with compression bandages from a kit that was now almost empty. His hands were red to the wrists. He wiped them on his jeans and left streaks that looked black in the shadow of the overpass. He can't ride, Sully said, looking at Ronan. Not like this. Not for hours. I can ride, Grit said from the ground. You can barely breathe. Breathing's optional. Riding isn't. Ronan crouched beside him. Up close, Grit looked worse than he sounded. His skin was clammy, his pupils dilated, his breathing shallow and fast. The tourniquet had stopped the major bleeding, but the damage was done. He'd lost enough blood to compromise everything. Judgment, reflexes, consciousness. Putting him on a motorcycle was a coin flip between escape and killing him. Listen to me, Ronan said. His voice was low, private, the voice he used when the truth was too heavy for normal volume. You ride with Torch, his bike, behind him. You hold on and you don't let go. If you feel yourself slipping, you tell us. No hero shit. We didn't drag you out of a laundromat in Flagstaff so you could bleed out under an overpass. Understand? Grit's jaw tightened. Something moved behind his eyes, not defiance, but the particular pain of a man being told he can't carry his own weight. For someone who'd spent his adult life being dismissed and discarded, being carried was harder than bleeding. Yeah, he said. I understand. They got him onto Torch's bike. Sully rigged a strap system from bungee cords and a length of rope, binding Grit's torso to Torch's back so that if he lost consciousness again, he wouldn't slide off. The arrangement looked desperate because it was. Grit's Harley lay on its side in the wash, front wheel bent, fuel leaking into the sand. They couldn't take it, couldn't hide it. It would be found within hours, and it would confirm their direction of travel to anyone who was looking, which was everyone. Ronan pulled out the prepaid phone he kept for emergencies. A flip phone, ancient, untraceable, bought with cash from a gas station in Yuma 3 years ago. He powered it on for the first time in months and connected to the data network long enough to check one thing. The Amber Alert had been upgraded. It was national now. Lila's face was on every news feed, every law enforcement bulletin, every highway sign with an electronic display. The description had been updated. 5 male suspects, motorcycle gang affiliation, armed and extremely dangerous. Use of lethal force authorized upon positive identification. Shoot on sight. Ronan stared at the screen. The backlight turned his face blue in the shadow of the overpass. He read the alert twice, then powered the phone off and removed the battery. How bad? Wraith asked. He was standing 3 feet away, reading Ronan's expression the way he'd been reading it for 25 years. Not the face itself, but the spaces between the muscles, the micro-tensions that most people couldn't see. They upgraded us to lethal force. Wraith absorbed this without visible reaction, a slight tightening around the eyes, a shift in his breathing, that was all. So every badge in the country thinks we kidnapped a child and they've been told to shoot first. That's the shape of it. And the people who actually want the child, the private military contractors with no oversight and unlimited resources, They're also hunting us. Yes. And we're standing under an interstate overpass with a wounded man, a terrified 8-year-old, and a necklace that apparently contains enough evidence to bring down a criminal network, but only if we can find someone trustworthy enough to receive it, which, according to a dead man's journal, doesn't include any federal agency currently in operation. Ronan almost smiled. Almost. When you say it like that, it sounds bad. It is bad. I know. Lila had moved closer during the conversation. She stood at Ronan's elbow, looking up at him with the expression of someone who has processed fear so thoroughly that it's become background noise, present but no longer controlling. Dad had a plan for this part too, she said. Both men looked down at her. He said if the news made you the bad guys, go to the place where the bad guys used to live. He said nobody looks for you where they already looked. Ronan frowned. Lila, what place? The airfield. The one where you used to train. He said it's abandoned. He said nobody goes there because it's contaminated or something, but it's not really. He said that was just a story to keep people away. Wraith's head turned slowly toward Ronan. The look on his face was the look of a man watching a puzzle assemble itself from pieces he didn't know existed. Coldwater Flats, Ronan said. The name sat in the air like something exhumed. Coldwater Flats. The desert airstrip where their unit had staged before deployments. A decommissioned military facility 60 miles south of Tucson, officially condemned due to chemical contamination from Cold War-era fuel storage. Fenced, posted, forgotten. The kind of place that showed up on satellite imagery as a gray scar in the desert, and on no one's priority list. David told her about Coldwater, Wraith said. Not a question. David told her about everything. He turned his 8-year-old daughter into a dead drop. That's exactly what he did. Every piece of information she carries, every location she knows, every code phrase she memorized. She's a living contingency plan. He built redundancy into his own child. The words came out harsher than Ronan intended. He saw Lila flinch and immediately hated himself for it. He knelt in front of her, his knee screaming its familiar protest, and put his hands on her shoulders. That's not your fault, he said. None of this is your fault. Your dad did what he did because he was out of options and he loved you more than anything. But I need you to understand something. From here on, we're not following his plan anymore. Lila's eyes widened. But his plan treated you like a piece on a chessboard. You're not a piece. You're a kid. And the 5 of us are going to do what we should have done from the beginning. We're going to stop running and we're going to end this. At the airfield, Ronan paused. Because the truth was that Coldwater Flats was the right move. It was isolated, defensible, and he knew every inch of its layout from memory. David Mercer, even from beyond whatever grave or prison held him, had been right. The airfield was the place to make a stand. But Ronan wasn't going to tell Lila that she was still following her dead father's script. Some truths were tactical, and some were kind, and this one needed to be kind. Yeah, he said. At the airfield. But on our terms, not his. They rode, south through the desert on back roads that didn't appear on GPS databases. Ranch roads, fire access trails, stretches of hard-packed earth that hadn't seen a tire in months. Torch rode with Grit strapped to his back like cargo, adjusting his speed for every bump, every wash crossing, every cattle guard. Sully stayed within arm's reach, monitoring Grit's consciousness through the comm with a running series of questions, name, date, location, the score of the last Super Bowl, that served as both medical assessment and the kind of dark comedy that keeps men sane when sanity is expensive. Lila rode with Ronan. She'd stopped shaking sometime during the escape from Brimstone Ridge and hadn't started again. Her grip on his shirt was steady now. Not the panicked clutch of a terrified child, but the deliberate hold of someone who'd made a decision about trust and was committed to it. They reached Coldwater Flats at sundown. The facility was exactly as Ronan remembered and worse. A chain-link fence with rusted barbed wire surrounded a perimeter that stretched half a mile in each direction. Inside, the remains of a military airstrip, cracked concrete runways, collapsed hangars, a control tower with no windows, fuel storage buildings that leaned at angles suggesting they'd lost their argument with gravity years ago. Desert scrub had reclaimed everything below knee height. The wind moved through the structures with a sound like breathing. Torch cut the fence with bolt cutters from his saddlebag. They rode through the gap and into the facility, 5 bikes, 4 now, with Grits abandoned, moving between the ruins like ghosts returning to a house they'd died in. Ronan chose the largest hangar. Its roof was partially intact, offering cover from aerial surveillance. The walls were corrugated steel, rusted but solid. The floor was concrete, cracked but level. Inside, the skeletal remains of 2 transport aircraft sat on deflated tires, their fuselages stripped of everything valuable, their wings providing additional overhead cover. They set up in the shadow of the larger aircraft. Torch built a small fire in a steel drum, not for warmth, though the desert night was dropping fast, but for light. Sully rebandaged Grit's arm and started an IV from the last bag of saline in his kit, hanging it from a landing gear strut with paracord. Wraith walked the perimeter, mapping entry points, sight lines, fields of fire, old habits. The habits of men who'd been trained to turn any location into a defensive position. Ronan sat on an empty fuel drum and laid both necklaces on his knees, his own, worn smooth and warm from his body, and the one from the lockbox, pristine and cold. 2 halves of a mechanism he'd never known existed. 2 keys to a door he'd never known was locked. He opened the journal to the last pages, the ones he hadn't read at the cabin, the ones that mattered most now. David Mercer's handwriting here was different from the rest of the journal, not hurried but deliberate, each letter formed with the precision of a man writing his will. The data on Ronan's necklace is encrypted with a 2-key system. My necklace, the one in the lockbox, contains the authentication sequence. When both necklaces are connected to any standard computer, the embedded drives sync automatically and the archive unlocks. The full archive contains 14,000 documents, financial records, communications intercepts, operational orders, personnel files, everything needed to identify, locate, and prosecute every member of the network from the ground level to the top. The top is a man named Elias Croft. You won't find his name in any database. He was our handler, the man who designed the program, the man who sent 12 young soldiers into harm's way and used their courage as camouflage for the largest intelligence theft in military history. He's been operating under civilian cover for 20 years, running the network from behind shell companies and private military contracts. He believes himself untouchable. He is wrong, but only if both necklaces reach the right hands. I've identified one person inside the federal system who isn't compromised. Her name is Supervisory Special Agent Dana Whitfield, FBI Phoenix Field Office. She was investigating the network independently before I contacted her. She has the clearance, the authority, and the integrity to receive the archive and act on it. But she can't come to you. Her communications are monitored. If she moves toward you, they'll know, and she'll be eliminated. You have to bring the necklaces to her. I'm sorry, brother. I keep asking you to do things you never agreed to. But you're the only person I trust to finish this. Not because you're the strongest or the smartest or the bravest, because you're the most stubborn son of a bitch I've ever met. And when you decide something matters, you don't stop. Lila matters. The truth matters. Please don't stop. Ronan closed the journal. The fire crackled in the steel drum. Shadows moved across the hangar walls like living things. Outside, the wind was picking up. Desert wind, dry and cold, carrying the smell of creosote and dust and something else, something chemical, the ghost of jet fuel that had soaked into the concrete decades ago. Ronan, Sully's voice from across the hangar, quiet, urgent. We've got a problem. Ronan stood. The necklaces went back around his neck, both of them now, the familiar weight of his own and the alien weight of David's, resting side by side against his sternum. Sully was kneeling beside Grit, the IV still running, his fingers on the younger man's wrist. Grit was conscious, but his breathing had changed. Faster, shallower, the rhythm of a body losing a fight it couldn't see. His pulse is thready, blood pressure's dropping. The wound isn't bleeding externally anymore, but I think there's internal pooling, either a secondary vessel or soft tissue damage I couldn't see in the field. He needs a hospital, not eventually. Now. A hospital means police. Police means... I know what it means. I'm telling you what he needs. Ronan looked at Grit. The young man's eyes were open, focused on the underside of the aircraft wing above him. His jaw was set. His good hand was gripping the edge of the sleeping mat Sully had laid him on, knuckles white, holding himself in place as though he were afraid of drifting. "Don't you dare," Grit said, without looking at Ronan. "Don't you dare pull me out of this. Not now. You're bleeding internally. Then I'll bleed internally at the finish line. I didn't ride through a goddamn mountain to die in a hangar." "Grit," I said no. His voice cracked, not from weakness, but from something fiercer. The desperate insistence of a man who'd been thrown away by every institution in his life and had finally found something worth being part of. "You pull me out now. I'm just another discharged veteran dying alone somewhere. I stay. I'm part of something that matters. You don't get to take that from me." The hangar was silent except for the wind and the fire and the steady drip of saline into Grit's arm. Ronan turned to Sully. "What do you need?" "Blood. His type is O-negative. I don't have any." "I'm O-negative," Torch said from the shadows. He stepped forward, already rolling up his sleeve. "Take what you need." Sully looked at him. "A field transfusion with no equipment, no cross-matching, no sterile environment. I didn't ask for a risk assessment. I said take what you need." 20 minutes later, Torch was sitting against the landing gear strut with a needle in his arm and a tube running to Grit's, watching his own blood travel the length of surgical tubing and disappear into another man's body. His face was pale, but his eyes were steady. The look of someone performing an act so fundamental, it bypassed thought entirely. Grit's color improved within minutes, not dramatically. This wasn't a movie, but enough. His breathing slowed. His grip on the mat loosened. His eyes found Torch's face and held there. "You didn't have to do that," Grit said. "Yeah, I did." "Why?" Torch looked at him for a long moment. The burn scars on his forearms caught the firelight, the damaged skin reflecting orange like something forged rather than wounded. "Because that's what brothers do." Wraith came in from the perimeter at a jog. His face was tight. His body carried the coiled energy of a man delivering news that would change the shape of everything. Vehicles. East approach. 3, maybe 4. Running dark. No headlights. Moving in formation. Military spacing. Ronan was on his feet before Wraith finished the sentence. "How far?" 2 miles, maybe 6 minutes at their current speed. "How did they find us?" "The phone." Wraith's voice was flat with certainty. "You powered it on under the overpass. Even with the battery removed after, that 30-second window was enough. They triangulated and they've been tracking the trajectory ever since." 30 seconds. One check of a news alert. One moment of needing to know how bad things were. And that moment had drawn a line from the overpass to this hangar as surely as if he'd painted an arrow on the desert floor. Ronan felt the weight of that mistake settle into his chest like a stone. No time for it. No time for anything except what happened next. "Sully, disconnect Grit. Get Lila into the drainage tunnel on the west side of the runway, the one we used for equipment storage. Take the journal. Take Grit. Stay hidden until you hear from me. And if I don't hear from you, then you get her to Dana Whitfield at the Phoenix Field office. Whatever it takes." Sully held his eyes for 3 seconds. Then he nodded. Not agreement. Acceptance. The medic's acceptance of a triage decision that put some lives ahead of others. He scooped up the journal, disconnected the IV, and helped Grit to his feet. Lila appeared at Ronan's side. She was holding the stuffed rabbit in one hand. With the other, she reached up and grabbed his wrist. "Don't die," she said. Not a plea. An instruction. Delivered with the same flat certainty her father must have used when he'd told her to memorize escape routes and door sounds and the words engraved inside a necklace that held the weight of decades. Ronan knelt. His knee hit the concrete and the pain was enormous and irrelevant. "I'm not going to die," he said. "I made your dad a promise 25 years ago that I'd bring everybody home. I'm late, but I keep my promises." Lila studied his face the way she studied everything, with the analytical intensity of a child who'd learned that survival depended on reading people correctly. Then she let go of his wrist. Sully carried Grit. Lila walked beside them, small and upright, the rabbit pressed against her chest. They disappeared into the darkness beyond the hangar's western wall. 3 men remained: Ronan, Wraith, Torch. 3 aging bikers in a ruined hangar, standing between an oncoming private army and an 8-year-old girl whose dead father had bet everything on the stubbornness of men the world had forgotten. 14,000 documents, Wraith said, checking the magazine of a handgun he'd kept in his saddlebag for 6 years without firing. You know, in the movies, they always upload the evidence from a laptop in the nick of time. We don't have a laptop, Ronan said. We have a phone. Ronan looked at him, then at the necklaces around his neck, then at the dead phone in his pocket. The prepaid flip phone with its $30 data plan and its 30-second window of betrayal. The necklaces sync when connected to a computer. David said any standard computer. A phone is a computer. It's a flip phone. Then we need a better phone. Torch was looking at the approaching vehicles through a gap in the hangar wall. His voice was unnervingly calm. Those SUVs out there probably have nice phones. Satellite uplinks, too. Military-grade communications equipment. Ronan stared at him. You want to steal their equipment. I want to use their equipment. There's a difference, probably. That requires getting close enough to take it. Torch looked at him with the expression of a man who'd walked into a burning house to save 2 children he'd never met and come out with scars he wore without complaint for 7 years. Close is what I do. The vehicles were visible now, dark shapes moving across the desert floor, headlights off, guided by night optics that turned the landscape green and granular. 4 SUVs, standard formation. Lead vehicle, 2 flanking, 1 trail. 16 to 20 operators based on vehicle capacity, against 3 men with 2 handguns and a lifetime of wounds. Wraith positioned himself behind the concrete base of the control tower, covering the main approach. Torch took the east wall of the hangar, where a collapsed section provided both cover and a line of retreat toward the vehicle's likely parking position. Ronan stood in the center of the hangar, visible, lit by the dying fire in the steel drum. Bait. The vehicle stopped 200 yards out. Doors opened. Figures emerged. Dark silhouettes moving with the coordinated efficiency of men who trained for exactly this kind of operation. They spread into a skirmish line and advanced toward the hangar on foot, weapons up, night vision casting faint green halos around their faces. A voice amplified by a bullhorn cut through the desert silence. Ronan Creed, we know you're inside. We know you have the girl and the necklaces. This doesn't have to end with anyone dying. Send the girl out with both necklaces and we walk away. You have 60 seconds. Ronan touched the 2 coins against his chest, David's and his own. 2 halves of a truth that had taken 25 years to assemble. He didn't move. 45 seconds. The wind shifted. Somewhere in the darkness, Torch was moving. Silent, low, circling toward the vehicles with the patience of a man who understood that the most dangerous thing in a fight isn't speed, it's timing. 30 seconds. Ronan looked at Wraith 30 feet away in the shadows. Their eyes met. 2 men who'd survived a building collapse, a quarter-century of guilt, and a truck stop parking lot confession that had cracked them both open like fault lines. Wraith nodded once. The bullhorn started to speak again, and every light in the hangar went out as Torch reached the vehicles, found the tactical command unit in the lead SUV, and cut the power to every piece of communications equipment their enemy had brought to the fight. The desert went dark. The desert went silent. And then Ronan stepped out of the hangar and into the night, walking toward 20 armed men with nothing but 2 necklaces and the unshakable certainty that some promises are worth more than survival. And from the darkness behind the enemy line, a sound rose that made every mercenary freeze. The unmistakable thundering ignition of a Harley-Davidson engine, followed by another and another, as Wraith and Torch brought the remaining bikes to life and aimed their headlights directly into the faces of men who had never once considered that their targets might charge. The headlights hit them like weapons. 3 Harley beams cutting across the desert floor, turning 20 mercenaries into deer. Blinded, disoriented, their night vision optics overloading from green to white in a fraction of a second. Men cursed and tore the devices from their faces. Others dropped to one knee and fired toward the light, but the light was moving, splitting, circling, Wraith banking hard left, Torch cutting right, engines screaming at a pitch that turned the air itself into a wall of sound. Ronan didn't run toward the chaos. He walked. Straight ahead through the gap between the skirmish line and the vehicles, moving with the deliberate pace of a man who had decided that speed was less important than inevitability. Rounds snapped past him, close enough to feel the heat displacement against his cheek, close enough to tug at the leather of his jacket. But he kept walking because he knew something the mercenaries didn't. They couldn't shoot what they couldn't see. And they couldn't see anything except 3 motorcycle headlights turning the desert into a strobing, roaring, disorienting hell. He reached the lead SUV in 45 seconds. The driver's door was open. Torch had left it that way when he'd killed the comms. Inside, the tactical command unit occupied the entire rear compartment. Screens, keyboards, a satellite uplink dish mounted on the roof, a hardened laptop bolted to a swing arm. Military-grade communications equipment worth more than everything Ronan owned combined. He climbed in, pulled both necklaces over his head. His hands were shaking, but his mind was clear. The chemical clarity of adrenaline and purpose fusing into something that felt almost like calm. The laptop was powered down. He pressed the startup button and waited. 3 seconds. 5. The screen flashed to life with a login prompt he couldn't bypass. He didn't need to bypass it. He found the USB ports on the side panel. 2 of them, standard configuration. The necklace's steel frames had small recessed slots that he'd always assumed were decorative. Manufacturing artifacts. The kind of detail that meant nothing. They meant everything. He pressed his necklace into the left port. The frame clicked into place with a precision that sent a chill down his spine. The perfect mechanical fit of something that had been designed for exactly this moment by a man who'd planned it 25 years in advance. He pressed David's necklace into the right port. The laptop screen went white, then black, then filled with scrolling text, file directories, thousands of them, cascading down the screen like a digital waterfall. Document names, dates, classification headers, financial records, communications intercepts, personnel files, operational orders spanning 3 decades, 14,000 documents, unlocking themselves in real time. Outside, the battle had changed shape. The mercenaries had recovered from the initial shock and were regrouping, using their vehicles as cover, directing fire toward the sound of the motorcycles. Wraith took a round in his saddlebag that blew his spare clothes across 40 feet of desert. Torch's front tire exploded, and he laid the bike down in a controlled slide, rolling clear and coming up behind a concrete barrier with the handgun he'd taken from his vest. Ronan's fingers moved across the laptop. He didn't know the satellite uplink software, but David had anticipated that too. A program auto-launched when both necklaces connected. A simple interface with a single field. Recipient email address. He typed the name from the journal. Supervisory Special Agent Dana Whitfield, FBI Phoenix Field Office. The email address was in the journal's final pages, memorized during the ride, because Ronan understood that paper could be lost, but memory, stubborn, relentless memory, survived. He entered the address, selected all 14,000 files. Hit send. The progress bar appeared. 0%. The satellite dish on the roof hummed as it acquired signal. 1%. 2. The upload speed was glacial. Military encryption layering each file before transmission, turning gigabytes of raw data into a stream of coded information that would take minutes to send. Minutes he didn't have. A shadow appeared at the driver's side door. Ronan turned and found himself staring into the face of a man he'd never seen before, but recognized immediately from David Mercer's description in the journal. Mid-60s. Silver hair cropped military short, a face composed of angles and decisions, eyes the color of gunmetal and just as cold. Elias Croft. Their former handler, the architect, the man who had designed the program that turned 12 soldiers into unwitting intelligence collectors and then built a criminal empire on what they'd gathered. He held a pistol pointed at Ronan's chest. His hand was perfectly steady. "The necklaces," Croft said. His voice was measured, unhurried, the voice of a man accustomed to giving orders that were followed without question. "Remove them from the ports." Ronan looked at the progress bar. 11%. "No. I will shoot you." "I know. And then I'll take them myself." "You will. But by the time you pull them out, that number," Ronan nodded toward the screen, "will be higher than it is now, and every percentage point is another few hundred documents that are already beyond your reach. Croft's eyes moved to the screen. 14%. His expression didn't change, but something shifted beneath it. A calculation, a reassessment, the micro-adjustment of a man realizing that the variable he'd failed to account for wasn't technology or firepower, it was stubbornness. "You're willing to die for a percentage point," Croft said. "I've been willing to die for less. Your friend David said the same thing before the end." The words landed like a blade between Ronan's ribs. He felt them cut through muscle and pride and the defensive architecture he'd built around the question he'd been carrying since Lila first appeared in the rain. "He's dead," Ronan said. Not a question. 3 months ago, he was very brave and very stupid. He believed that evidence could change things, that exposing the truth would matter, as if truth has ever defeated money. Croft smiled. It was the worst smile Ronan had ever seen. Not cruel, not angry, but genuinely amused. The smile of a man who'd watched idealism lose for so long that its persistence had become a source of entertainment. "I offered him a deal. Walk away, take his daughter, disappear. He refused. He said he owed a debt to 12 men who'd trusted him." 21%. "He talked about you, see," Croft continued. The pistol hadn't wavered. "Said you were the most stubborn man he'd ever served with. Said you'd carry the necklace until you died because that's who you are. A man who holds on to things long after holding on stops making sense." He was right. He was sentimental. Sentimentality killed him. Loyalty killed him. There's a difference. 28%. A burst of gunfire erupted somewhere behind the vehicles. Croft didn't flinch. Neither did Ronan. 2 men in a bubble of stillness while chaos expanded around them. "I'm going to count to 3, Croft said. "Then I'm going to shoot you in the head. Then I'm going to remove the necklaces. And this will end the way it was always going to end, with the people who built the system maintaining control of it." "One thing," Ronan said. "What?" "You said David refused your deal. You said he chose the debt over his life, over his daughter." "Correct." "You think that was stupid?" "I think it was predictable." Ronan nodded slowly. "Then you don't understand the first thing about any of us, and that's why you're going to lose." Croft's finger tightened on the trigger, and from the darkness behind him, a small voice said, "That's my dad's necklace." Croft turned. Lila stood 10 feet from the SUV, alone, the stuffed rabbit in one hand, her dark hair wild, her eyes locked on the man who had killed her father with the kind of focus that didn't belong to a child. The focus of someone who had spent months imagining this moment without knowing what shape it would take. Behind her, emerging from the drainage tunnel, Sully moved in a low crouch with his hands already reaching for Croft's weapon arm. The distraction lasted 2 seconds. That was enough. Ronan lunged from the driver's seat and drove his shoulder into Croft's midsection. The pistol discharged, the sound enormous, concussive, a physical force that compressed the air inside the vehicle. But the round went into the roof, punching through metal and insulation and disappearing into the night sky. They hit the ground together, Ronan on top, his weight and his fury pinning the older man against the packed earth. Croft fought. He fought with the technical precision of someone who'd been trained decades ago and had maintained the skills the way other men maintained their golf game, efficiently, without passion. An elbow strike caught Ronan above the eye and opened a cut that began bleeding immediately, the blood running into his vision and turning the world red on one side. Ronan didn't let go. He got his hand on the pistol and twisted it free with a motion that bent Croft's index finger backward until it snapped, a small, crisp sound that was somehow louder than the gunshot. Croft's face contorted, but he didn't scream. He was the kind of man who'd decided long ago that screaming was beneath him. Sully arrived and pinned Croft's arms behind his back with a zip tie from his medical kit. The restraint that was meant for splinting a broken limb worked equally well for restraining the architect of a criminal empire. Ronan stood. Blood ran down his face and dripped from his chin onto the desert floor. He walked back to the SUV on legs that felt like they belonged to someone else. The screen read 63%. He sat in the driver's seat and watched the number climb while the sounds of the battle shifted around him. Less gunfire now, more shouting, the particular chaos of a fight losing its structure. Wraith had circled behind the remaining mercenaries and was using the terrain the way their unit had been trained to use it. Not as cover, but as a weapon, funneling opponents into positions where their numbers became a liability. 71%. Torch appeared at the passenger door, breathing hard, his left hand clutching his right shoulder where a bullet had grazed him, leaving a furrow of torn fabric and abraded skin that bled freely, but not dangerously. "How many are left?" Ronan asked, without looking away from the screen. 6 surrendered, 4 ran, the rest are down. Wraith's holding the perimeter. Torch looked at the progress bar. "Is that what I think it is?" "Every document David collected, every name, every operation, every dollar." "Where's it going?" "To someone who'll use it." 84%. Torch looked at Croft, zip-tied on the ground, silver hair in the dirt, gunmetal eyes staring at the sky with the fixed expression of a man watching his empire dissolve in real time. "He the one?" "He's the one." Torch nodded. He walked over to Croft and stood above him, the burn scars on his forearms visible in the light from the laptop screen. He didn't say anything, didn't need to. He just stood there, bleeding and exhausted and alive, and let the man on the ground understand what it looked like when the people you'd used as tools became the people who dismantled your machine. 92%. 97. 100. Upload complete. Ronan stared at the screen for a long time. The words glowed green against the black background, pulsing slightly with each refresh cycle. And in that glow he saw 25 years of guilt and grief and silence reaching their end. Not with a bang, not with triumph, but with 2 words on a screen in a stolen vehicle in the middle of a desert that didn't care about justice or redemption or any of the things that humans built their lives around. He reached up and pulled both necklaces from the ports, held them in his hands. 2 pieces of silver and steel that had carried more weight than their physical mass could possibly account for. He thought about destroying them, crushing them under his boot the way Torch had crushed the transmitter at the cabin. Ending the mechanism. Killing the device that David had built without his knowledge or consent. Instead, he put them back around his neck. Both of them. His and David's. Because they weren't devices anymore. The data was gone, transmitted, received, beyond retrieval or destruction. What remained was metal. Memory. The physical residue of a bond that had survived distance, silence, betrayal, death, and 25 years of believing in different versions of the same lie. He stepped out of the vehicle. The desert sky was enormous above him. No moon, no clouds, just stars in quantities that made the darkness feel inhabited. The air smelled like gunpowder and dust and the fading heat of engines that had been pushed past their limits. Wraith walked toward him from the perimeter. His face was cut in 2 places. His jacket was torn. He moved with a limp that hadn't been there before. They looked at each other. "It's done?" Wraith asked. "It's done." Wraith nodded. Then he did something Ronan had never seen him do in 25 years of brotherhood. He reached out and put his hand on Ronan's shoulder. Not a grip, not a pat, just contact. The weight of a palm resting on leather and muscle, transmitting nothing except presence. Ronan put his hand on Wraith's shoulder. They stood like that for 5 seconds. Maybe 10. In the vocabulary of men who'd been trained to express nothing, it was an opera. The aftermath was long and complicated and unglamorous, the way real endings always are. Sully emerged from the drainage tunnel with Grit leaning on his shoulder and Lila walking ahead of them, the stuffed rabbit dangling from one hand, her other hand trailing along the concrete wall of the tunnel as if maintaining contact with something solid was the only thing keeping her grounded. Grit was pale but standing. The field transfusion had bought him enough blood to remain conscious, and the tourniquet had held, and the combination of Torch's sacrifice and Sully's competence had done what trauma centers with full staff and equipment sometimes couldn't, kept a man alive long enough to matter. The mercenaries who'd surrendered sat in a line against the fence, zip-tied, disarmed, staring at the ground with the vacant expressions of men whose paychecks had just stopped being worth the risk. They weren't soldiers, they weren't believers, they were contractors, men who fought for money and stopped fighting when the money stopped making sense. Croft was separate. He sat against the wheel of the lead SUV, his broken finger swelling to twice its normal size, his eyes tracking everything with the undiminished attention of a man whose mind was still working even as his empire collapsed. He watched Ronan approach and his expression didn't change. "It won't stick," Croft said. "You've sent documents to one agent, one person in a system I've spent 20 years compromising. She'll be reassigned. The evidence will be classified. The investigation will stall. This is how power works. It doesn't surrender because someone uploads files." Ronan crouched in front of him. His bloody face and exhausted eyes and road-worn leather made him look like something excavated from the desert, ancient, weathered, immovable. "David said you'd say that. He wrote it in the journal, word for word." Something flickered in Croft's expression, the first crack. "He also said to tell you that he didn't send the files to one person. He built a distribution protocol into the upload. When both necklaces synced, the archive wasn't transmitted to a single address. It was copied to 14 separate servers in 7 countries, with automatic distribution to investigative journalists, oversight committees, and independent prosecutors in 4 jurisdictions. Ronan paused. "You didn't read the fine print. David always said that was your weakness. You built the big picture and ignored the details." Croft's jaw tightened. The crack widened. "This is how power falls," Ronan said quietly. "Not because someone shoots it. Because someone more patient takes it apart from the inside, one document at a time, and by the time you notice, the pieces are already scattered where you can't reach them." He stood and walked away. He didn't look back. Croft wasn't worth looking back at. He was a man in the dirt with a broken finger and a disintegrating legacy, and in 12 hours the documents David Mercer had spent 2 decades compiling would be in the hands of people who would spend the next several years turning them into indictments. The first helicopter arrived 40 minutes later, a legitimate one this time, bearing the markings of the FBI's Phoenix division. It landed on the cracked runway and disgorged a team of agents in tactical gear, led by a woman in her 50s with short gray hair and the bearing of someone who had been waiting for this moment longer than she'd expected to wait. Dana Whitfield walked toward Ronan with a stride that was neither hurried nor hesitant. She stopped 6 feet from him and studied his face. The blood, the cuts, the exhaustion, the 2 necklaces hanging against his chest. "Ronan Creed," she said, not a question. "Agent Whitfield. David told me you'd look like hell." David was an optimist. The faintest shadow of a smile crossed her face. Then it was gone, replaced by the professional composure of an agent standing in the middle of the biggest case of her career. "The files arrived. All of them. My office is already coordinating with international counterparts. Croft's network is burning as we speak. Arrests in 3 states, asset freezes in 2 countries, and enough evidence to keep federal prosecutors busy for the next decade." She paused. "The Amber Alert has been rescinded. Your names will be cleared by morning. I want you to know that what was done to you, the false alert, the shoot-on-sight order, that came from inside the network, not from us. The agents involved have already been identified." Ronan nodded. He didn't say thank you. Gratitude felt inadequate and unnecessary. They hadn't done this for recognition or clearance or the restoration of names that had never meant much to the world in the first place. He looked back at the hangar where Sully was loading Grit into the helicopter for transport to a hospital in Tucson. Grit's face was ashen, but his eyes were open and focused. And as the medics lifted his stretcher, he raised his good hand toward Ronan. Not a wave, not a salute, just an open palm. A gesture that said, "I'm still here. You kept me here." Ronan raised his palm back. Torch sat on the wing of one of the ruined aircraft, having his shoulder wound cleaned by an FBI medic who kept telling him to hold still and whom Torch kept ignoring because holding still had never been part of his vocabulary. The burn scars on his forearms caught the first light of dawn, and in that light they looked less like wounds and more like proof. Evidence that a man could walk into fire and come out carrying something worth saving. Wraith stood at the edge of the runway, alone, facing east, watching the sunrise paint the desert in shades of copper and gold. His hollow cheeks caught the light in ways that made him look almost young. His hands, for the first time in as long as Ronan could remember, were not shaking. And Lila sat on the concrete apron outside the hangar, the stuffed rabbit in her lap, her bare feet dangling above the cracked tarmac. She was watching everything with the quiet intensity of a child who has passed through something enormous and emerged on the other side different, not broken, not healed, but changed in ways that would take years to understand. Ronan sat beside her. The concrete was cold through his jeans. His knee was a symphony of pain that he had stopped trying to conduct. His hands rested on his thighs, palms down, the necklaces warm against his chest. "Your dad," he said after a while. He was the bravest man I ever served with, and the most infuriating. He had this way of making you do things you never agreed to, and then making you realize later that you would have agreed if he'd asked. Lila didn't respond immediately. She was threading the rabbit's ear through her fingers, a repetitive motion that served the same purpose as Ronan's cigarettes. Something to do with your hands while your mind processed things too large for words. "Is he really gone?" she asked. Ronan could have softened it, could have said we don't know for certain, or there's always hope, or any of the gentle lies that adults construct to protect children from the geometry of grief. But Lila had been lied to enough. By circumstances, by systems, by the architecture of her father's contingency plans. She deserved the clean edge of truth, even if it cut. "Yeah," Ronan said. "He's really gone." Lila's hand stopped moving on the rabbit's ear. She stared at the horizon where the sun was climbing above the mountains, turning the sky from dark blue to amber to a white that hurt to look at. "He told me once that if he ever didn't come back, I shouldn't be sad for too long. He said I should find the people who keep their promises and hold on to them." She looked at Ronan. "Are you going to keep your promises?" "Which ones?" "All of them." Ronan took a breath. The desert air was cold and clean and tasted like the first morning of something new. Not a fresh start, because none of them were fresh and the starts had all happened long ago, but a continuation. A next chapter in a story that had been paused for 25 years and was finally moving again. "Yeah," he said. "All of them." 3 weeks later, the Iron Covenant gathered at a small ranch property outside of Benson that Torch had found through a contact who owed him a favor from the house fire. It wasn't much. A 3-bedroom adobe with a sagging porch, a detached garage that Torch had already begun converting into a shop, and 40 acres of desert scrub that stretched to the mountains in every direction. Grit's arm was in a sling. The surgeons in Tucson had repaired the arterial damage and told him he'd regain full function in 6 months, provided he followed the physical therapy protocol. He wouldn't follow it exactly, none of them followed anything exactly, but he'd do enough. Sully would make sure of that, checking the wound every 3 days with the professional thoroughness and personal investment of a man who'd saved a life and intended to see the investment through. Torch had parked his bike in the garage and started rebuilding Grit's wrecked Harley from parts he was sourcing through a network of mechanics and salvage yards that stretched from Tucson to El Paso. He worked on it in the evenings after the heat broke, with the garage doors open and the sound of tools on metal carrying across the property like a mechanical lullaby. Wraith had done something nobody expected. He'd called his son. The conversation had lasted 4 minutes, long enough for Wraith to say, "I'm sorry," and for the voice on the other end to say, "I know," and for the silence that followed to contain something that wasn't resolution, but was at least the beginning of contact. He'd hung up and walked to the edge of the property and stood there for an hour, looking at nothing, his hands in his pockets, his shoulders carrying a weight that was slightly, imperceptibly, less than the weight they'd carried before. Ronan handled the legal proceedings. Agent Whitfield had been thorough. The Amber Alert was rescinded within 12 hours of the upload, their records were cleared within a week, and the network of former military operators that Croft had built was dismantled with the systematic precision of a demolition crew taking down a condemned building. Croft himself was in federal custody, along with 37 associates across 4 states. The trial would take years. The outcome was as certain as anything in the legal system could be. Lila's custody was the last piece. The system wanted to place her, foster care, group home, the institutional conveyor belt that processed children like inventory. Ronan had sat in a family court office in Tucson across from a social worker who looked at 5 aging bikers with criminal-adjacent histories and saw exactly what the system always saw: risk. "She needs stability," the social worker said. She has stability, Ronan replied. She needs a traditional family environment. She needs people who'll die for her. How many traditional family environments offer that? The social worker had frowned, but Agent Whitfield had intervened. A phone call, a letter, a detailed account of what 5 men had done to protect one child against an organization that had corrupted federal agencies and operated with impunity for decades. The court granted temporary guardianship to Ronan Creed, with review hearings scheduled quarterly. It wasn't permanent. Nothing was permanent. But it was real. On the evening of the 3rd week, they gathered on the porch. 5 men and 1 girl. The sun was setting behind the Dragoon Mountains, painting the sky in colors that had no names in English. Somewhere between rust and gold and the purple bruise of a day that had been beautiful and was now ending. Ronan hung both necklaces on a nail inside the front door, his and David's, side by side. The wolf heads facing outward, the stars catching the last light from the window. "What are you doing?" Lila asked. She was sitting on the porch railing, the stuffed rabbit beside her, wearing new boots that Sully had bought her from a thrift store in Benson. They were red. She'd chosen them herself. "Putting them where they belong," Ronan said. "Aren't you going to wear yours?" He looked at the necklace, the silver coin he'd worn against his skin for 25 years, the weight that had shaped his posture, his grief, his identity. The device David Mercer had hidden inside without his knowledge, and the talisman he'd carried through a quarter-century of guilt and loneliness, and the kind of silence that builds up inside a man like sediment until it changes the landscape. "No," he said. "I think I carried it long enough." Lila studied him with that analytical gaze she'd inherited from her father, the look that saw past the surface into the mechanism underneath. "Mom would have liked you," she said quietly. It was the first time she'd mentioned her mother. Ronan waited, but she didn't elaborate. Some doors open once, briefly, and then close again on their own schedule. "I would have liked her too," he said. Sully brought coffee. Black for the men, hot chocolate for Lila, made from a packet he'd found in the back of a kitchen cabinet. Probably expired, definitely adequate. They sat on the porch and drank in silence while the sky darkened and the first stars appeared and the desert cooled around them with the slow exhale of a landscape releasing the day's heat. Grit broke the silence. "So what now?" It was the same question he'd asked that night at the gas station, a lifetime ago, when Lila had first appeared in the rain. The simplest question in the world, and this time the answer was different. "Now we stay," Ronan said. "Here?" "Here." "Doing what?" Ronan looked at Lila. She was blowing on her hot chocolate, her small hands wrapped around the mug, her feet in their red boots swinging above the porch floor. She looked up and caught him watching and didn't look away. "Whatever comes next," Ronan said. The 5 motorcycles sat in the garage beside the half-rebuilt Harley that Torch was assembling from parts and stubbornness. Their engines were cold. Their tires were still. For the first time in years, the machines that had carried 5 men across highways and through deserts and into battles, they had no business surviving were at rest. Later that night, after Lila had fallen asleep on the couch with the rabbit tucked under her arm and the red boots still on because she'd refused to take them off, Ronan stepped outside alone. The desert was vast and silent around the property. Coyotes called in the distance, thin, wild voices that carried across the empty land like questions nobody expected answers to. He lit a cigarette. The flame trembled in the breeze, then steadied. He smoked slowly, watching the smoke dissolve into darkness, listening to the sounds of the house behind him. Torch laughing at something Sully said, the clink of a coffee mug set down too hard. Wraith's quiet voice saying something that made Grit respond with mock outrage. The sounds of men who had found something worth stopping for. He thought about David Mercer, about the building that had collapsed, about the order he'd given to leave a man behind and the 25 years of guilt that had followed, and the discovery that the man he'd mourned had been alive, working, sacrificing, and ultimately dying for a truth that was bigger than any of them. He thought about the necklace hanging inside the front door. 2 necklaces. 2 halves of a key that had already served its purpose. He thought about Lila, about the promise he'd made on the hangar floor before the battle, about the weight of a child's trust, and the terrifying, humbling, irreplaceable privilege of being chosen by someone who had every reason to trust no one. The cigarette burned down to the filter. He dropped it and ground it out with the toe of his boot. Then he went inside and locked the door and sat in the chair beside the couch where Lila slept and listened to her breathing, steady, slow, unafraid, until the desert sky turned from black to gray to the pale blue of a morning that didn't owe them anything but arrived anyway, generous and indifferent and new. The Iron Covenant Motorcycle Brotherhood had ridden through storms, across state lines, through mountains that tried to kill them, and a conspiracy that nearly succeeded. They'd been called criminals, labeled dangerous, targeted for elimination by men who believed that power was permanent and loyalty was a weakness. They were none of those things. They were 5 broken men who had made a promise to each other in the ruins of their service and kept that promise through everything the world had thrown at them. And now they were something else, something they hadn't planned and couldn't have predicted. They were a family, not by blood, not by law, not by any mechanism the world recognized or respected, by choice, by sacrifice, by the particular alchemy that occurs when damaged people stop running and decide to protect each other instead. The motorcycles would ride again. The road would call the way it always called, persistent, patient, offering distance to men who'd once needed distance more than anything. But for now, the engines were quiet. For now, the road could wait. For now, a little girl in red boots slept safely in a house full of wolves who had learned at last that the thing worth guarding wasn't a necklace or a secret or a legacy carved in silver. It was this. It was always this.